when he brings criminal charges against his political opponents, be they liberal Democrats or conservative Republicans, that this man is a danger to everything this country stands for.
This may look like one senator delivering a heated critique, but it's actually a stress test of Democratic restraint in real time. What's really being tested here is whether Congress, the courts, and public accountability can still function as limits on executive power when politics becomes a loyalty contest. This raises broader questions about rule of law standards, institutional independence, and whether elections remain trusted when truth becomes a strategic weapon. In this video, we'll break down the constitutional stakes behind these claims, the power centers being challenged, and what the next steps mean for accountability in America.
The request that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, Your Honor.
Mr. President, once again, let's be honest. Let us face up to reality, and let us acknowledge that most Americans understand that our great nation, once the envy of the entire world, is now in the midst of a deep decline. And for the sake of our children and future generations, we must end that decline and turn this country around in very fundamental ways. Mr. President, not so many years ago, the United States of America was admired, respected by people throughout the world for our generosity, for our concern for the poor of the world, for our democracy, for our Constitution, for our rule of law, for our way of life. We were admired, respected. People around the world said, you know what, we would like our country to be like the United States of America. Tragically, Mr. President, that is no longer the case. I was just on the phone this afternoon with an elected official in Europe who literally could not believe what is happening to our country today, and I fear that millions of people throughout the world, in every continent of this world, in every country in this world, are looking at the United States of America and say, what in God's name is happening to that great country? But it's not only our standing in the world and our increased isolation from other countries that I worry about. Mr. President, we used to have the highest standard of living of any country on earth. That was it, America. Strongest middle class in the world. We used to be a country where the American dream said that our young people will do better than their parents. My dad came to this country at the age of 17, having dropped out of school at the age of 14 from Poland, with the dream that his sons would do better than they did. My mom graduated high school with the dream that maybe her sons would have a college education. That was the dream of millions of people. We work hard so that our kids would do better. The reality today, according to a number of studies, is that everything equal, unless we turn around, our younger generation will have a lower standard of living than their parents. They will own their own home at a much older age than their parents. And when we talk about America being in a state of decline and the need to bring about fundamental transformation of this country, understand that 2/3 of the American people, according to a New York Times poll the other day, 2/3 of the American people now believe that a middle-class lifestyle is out of reach. We used to be a country of the middle class. And now 2/3 of the American people say, no, the American middle-class lifestyle is out of my reach. Mr. President, we used to be the best educated country on earth, best public school systems on earth. Not the case anymore. We used to have the best health care system of any country on earth. Not anymore. We used to provide good, affordable housing for our people. Not anymore. We used to have the most advanced transportation system in the world. Not anymore. Just take a look about how the city of Washington dealing with the current snowstorm. In many respects, our great nation is falling further and further behind other countries, and we must not allow that to continue. Mr. President, the United States, our people, have faced horrific crises in the past, going back to the very beginning, the origins of this country, when a small number of people dared to have the dream and the courage to take on King George III and the British Empire and the most powerful military in the world, because they wanted their independence and they wanted their freedom. That was a crisis, and they prevailed. In the 1840s, there were people who were saying slavery is an abomination. It is immoral. We can't talk about a declaration of independence that says all men are created equal and enslave millions of people. We've got to end slavery. And they struggled and they struggled, the abolitionists. And there was a horrible civil war where so many people died. Finally, we ended the abomination of slavery, and the struggle continued to Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement and the end of segregation. This country went through the Great Depression. 25% of our people were unemployed. And government had to redefine itself, and we did that. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, December of 1941, we were not prepared to fight a war in the East or a war against Hitler in Europe. And yet within a few years, because the country came together, instead of building cars, we built tanks and we built fighter planes, we ended up winning that war. Won a war on two fronts. Bottom line, in all of these crises and others, the nation came together and prevailed. We did it then, and I have little doubt if we do not allow people to divide us up by where we were born or the color of our skin, we can once again overcome the crisis that we are in right now, which in my view is the most serious crisis in the modern history of our country. And let me just say a few words about what is happening in Minneapolis right now as I speak. Let me be very clear. America is not about and must never be about a domestic military force called ICE, which, as we speak at this moment, is occupying a military occupation of one of our great American cities, Minneapolis, and is terrorizing the occupants in that city. America is not and must never be about federal agents shooting American citizens down in cold blood, breaking down doors to arrest people, or sending 5-year-olds to detention centers, all in clear violation of our Constitution. That is what takes place in dictatorships, in authoritarian societies, where there is not a rule of law. It does not and it must not be allowed to take place in the United States or any democracy on earth. So let me be very clear. ICE must get out of Minnesota now. ICE must get out of Maine now. ICE must stop terrorizing the American people. Not another penny should be given to ICE or Customs and Border Patrol unless there are fundamental reforms in how those agencies function and until there is new leadership at the Department of Homeland Security and among those who run our immigration policy. To be clear, Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller must go. But Trump's movement toward authoritarianism is not just about the use of his domestic army against the American people. It is about his attack against Venezuela in direct violation of the Constitution and international law, where he not only lacked congressional authorization, but where no one in Congress had any knowledge about what was taking place. Trump's authoritarianism is about disrupting the 100-plus-year alliances we have had with our allies in Europe and insanely threatening to seize Greenland from our longtime ally, Denmark. Does anyone in their right mind believe that the United States of America should threaten violence against our longtime allies? Trump's authoritarianism is about attacking Europe every day, one attack or another, because it is a continent of democratic countries, all very different, but they are democratic countries which actually elect their leaders. And apparently, increasingly, Europe and these countries will not simply do Trump's bidding, will now come to him with all kinds of gifts. while at the same time as he attacks Europe every day, demeans Europe, insults Europe, he is busy cozying up to his autocratic friends in Saudi Arabia, who have helped line his pockets with billions of dollars from cryptocurrency and real estate deals. Not a problem that the head of Saudi Arabia is a murderer who our intelligence agency believed was responsible for the death of Washington Post correspondent Jamal Khashoggi. He is our ally. He's got a lot of money, $1.5 trillion family, wealthiest family on earth, could do Trump family a lot of good. Not a problem that one of our allies is Benjamin Netanyahu, who has engaged in atrocities against the people of Gaza and is now under indictment by the International Criminal Court as a war criminal. Good ally. Those are the kind of guys we want. War criminals, trillionaires who put dissenters in jail. Saudi Arabia, a dictatorship. Trump's authoritarianism is about his repeated threats to make Canada, I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border, Canada one of our closest and most dependable allies, the 51st state. I mean, just think for a minute. Our allies for decades and decades, close friends, and you go around insulting this country and say you're going to become our 51st state. What world does Trump live in? How does his mind tell him to do that? Let's be clear. The American people want us to ally ourselves with democracies around the world, not dictatorships, not authoritarian societies. They do not want to be allied with or put American lives on the line for dictatorships like those that exist in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, or least of all, Putin's Russia. Mr. President, everyone in this chamber, including my Republican colleagues, understands that when Trump usurps the power of Congress, when he attacks the courts, when he threatens and intimidates the media and universities, and perhaps most significantly, when he brings criminal charges against his political opponents, be they liberal Democrats or conservative Republicans, that this man is a danger to everything this country stands for. My Republican colleagues know this, and the time is long overdue for them to begin speaking out against Trump's dangerous movement toward authoritarianism. We can disagree on the issues. We do disagree on the issues. But we should and must agree that this country not move toward an authoritarian society with more and more power in the hands of the President of the United States. And in that regard, let me applaud Chris Madell, who was a leading Republican candidate for governor in Minnesota and who recently ended his campaign because he could not defend the National Republican Party in the face of what was happening in his own state of Minnesota. When Mr. Madell said, and I quote, "United States citizens, particularly those of color, live in fear. United States citizens are carrying papers to prove their citizenship. That's wrong. Driving while Hispanic is not a crime. Neither is driving while Asian," end of quote. Mr. Madell is right, and more Republicans need to speak out if they care about protecting the values this nation was founded upon. And when we talk about authoritarianism, we must also talk about the big lie, the lies that are told over and over again. Black is white, white is black, the constant barrage of lies that come from the White House. We can disagree on the issues, but you cannot have a democracy when the President of the United States lies profoundly every single day. No, Mr. President, Renee Good was not a domestic terrorist. She was the mother of 3 sitting in her car when she was shot. No, Alexander Preddy was not a would-be assassin, as Trump's administration has suggested. No, last night's attack on Representative Ilhan Omar while she was conducting a town hall meeting was not staged. Somebody attacked her, threatened her. No, the January 6th insurrectionists were not conducting peaceful demonstrations. They were attempting to overthrow the results of an election. No, the 2020 election was not stolen from Donald Trump. He lost that election by over 7 million votes. And yet today, as we speak, right now, Trump's FBI has raided an election office in Georgia to seize their ballots. And this is, by the way, after the Attorney General of the United States demanded that Minnesota hand over its voter rolls as a pretext for ICE stopping its assault on that state. Mr. President, President Trump's unacceptable actions are raising the question in the hearts of millions of Americans of whether or not there will be free and fair elections in 2026 and 2028. But, Mr. President, it's not just Trump's authoritarianism that concerns me and millions of Americans very deeply. I worry very much about the growing economic and political power of the oligarchs in this country, the multi-billionaires who are side by side with Trump, who are front row when he got inaugurated. I think all of us will remember Mr. Musk there, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Bezos, some 14 other billionaires sitting there when he was inaugurated. Today, in America, we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had in the history of our nation. Unbelievably, Elon Musk, the wealthiest man alive, now owns more wealth than the bottom 53% of American households. One man now owns more wealth, some 700 billion plus, more wealth than the bottom 53% of American households. Top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 93%. CEOs of large profitable corporations now earn 350 times what their average worker makes. Meanwhile, in America today, while the very rich become obscenely richer, 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, unable to afford the skyrocketing cost of housing, health care, education, child care, groceries, electricity, or other basic necessities. Very rich becoming phenomenally richer, tens of millions of Americans struggling to pay for their basic needs. And let us understand, Mr. President, that the oligarchs, the multi-billionaires, do not simply put their money under their mattresses. Not only do they want to own and control our economy, they are determined to own and control our corrupt political system as well. As we all know, Mr. Musk spent at least $290 million to elect Trump. You think you're living in a democracy where one guy could spend $290 million to elect his buddy to be president? The 100 richest people in our country spent $2.6 billion on the 2024 election. 100 people. Yeah, you, average American, you get the right to vote. But billionaires can spend hundreds of millions of dollars in super PACs that defeat the candidates who stand up for the working class and elect those people who stand with the oligarchs. And that number, the amount of money being spent in these super PACs by the oligarchs is growing and growing every day. And I should point out that it is not just the Republican Party, it is Democratic billionaires as well. This is a bipartisan effort on the part of the billionaire class. Mr. President, just recently, a super PAC representing the crypto industry just announced that it has $193 million in cash at its disposal for the 2026 election. In other words, you got concerns about crypto? Well, you're going to have to face a barrage of 30-second ads from extraordinarily wealthy people. Big tech oligarchs in Silicon Valley have already pledged to spend at least $200 million on a super PAC sympathetic to the AI, artificial intelligence industry, an industry that threatens to displace tens of millions of American workers. You worried about AI? You worried about robotics? You worried about the fact that tens of millions of jobs are going to be lost during the next decade? You're concerned about it? You want to have some regulations? Well, guess what? These guys got hundreds of millions of dollars to spend in a campaign against you. Now, that may sound like democracy to somebody. It does not sound like democracy to me. It sounds like a very corrupt system owned by the very wealthiest people in the world. And that is why, if we're going to come out of our decline, we're going to turn this country around, probably there is nothing more important that we can do than end the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, abolish super PACs, and move to the public funding of elections. Somebody wants to run against me, they disagree with my ideas, fine, go for it. But we should not have a system where candidates are backed by billionaires who can outspend heavily those candidates who are standing up for working people. That is not democracy. That is oligarchy. In a democracy, elections must be about one person, one vote, not billionaires buying politicians. But, Mr. President, that's not all. When we look at what is going on in America, and it's important that we do that, take a look at our broken health care system. We are spending twice as much per capita on health care as the people of any other nation, and yet we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all. We've got 85 million Americans who are uninsured or underinsured, and over 60,000 people die each year because they can't afford to see a doctor on time. You want to turn around America? You want to end our decline? We're the richest country on earth. We spend more on health care per person than any other country. Let us have the best health care system in the world, guaranteeing health care to every man, woman, and child. That's what we should be doing. And that is why we should pass a Medicare for all single-payer system. And when we talk about America being in decline, we're talking about the skyrocketing price of housing and the fact that tens of millions of Americans.
The moment that echoed through the chamber was not a whisper or a technical objection, it was a declaration. When Senator Bernie Sanders reached the end of his remarks and stated that Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller must go, it was not framed as partisan theater. It was delivered as a warning. A line drawn in the sand, a conclusion formed after a long, deliberate accounting of what he believes the nation is becoming. What unfolded in that hearing was more than a speech. It was an indictment of drift, a reflection on power unrestrained by humility, on authority exercised without consent, and on a country that once stood as a reference point for democratic aspiration, now struggling to recognize its own reflection. Sanders did not begin with personalities. He began with decline. A decline not defined by a single policy or administration, but by the erosion of trust, stability, and shared purpose. He reminded the chamber that the United States was once admired for its institutions, its constitutional framework, and its commitment to the rule of law. Not perfection, but aspiration. A system built on restraint, accountability, and the belief that no leader stands above the law. His words carried a global lens. Calls from European officials expressing disbelief. Allies watching with confusion. Not because America is challenged, but because America appears unmoored. What made this moment resonate was its scope. Sanders connected domestic policy to international credibility. Economic anxiety to democratic fragility. Executive power to historical memory. He spoke of a middle class that once anchored the nation, now uncertain of its future. Of younger generations facing delayed stability. Of systems that once led the world, now lagging behind peers. Education, infrastructure, housing, public confidence. These were not abstract concepts. They were signals. Throughout American history, Sanders argued, crisis has been met with unity. Independence was forged against an empire. Slavery was confronted through struggle and sacrifice. Economic collapse was answered by redefining government's role. Global war demanded mobilization, cooperation, and shared purpose. The lesson was not nostalgia. It was precedent. The nation has faced defining moments before and emerged stronger when it chose collective resolve over division. But the present moment, he warned, carries a different risk. Not an external enemy, but internal corrosion. The normalization of executive overreach. The use of federal power in ways that alarm communities rather than reassure them. Actions that resemble systems Americans once defined themselves against. Sanders was explicit in his concern that such tactics undermine constitutional limits and blur the line between democratic governance and coercive authority. He expanded that warning beyond borders. Foreign policy, he argued, reflects values, threats toward allies, disregard for longstanding partnerships. Comfort with autocratic leadership while dismissing democratic counterparts. These choices, he suggested, are not random. They reflect a worldview where power is transactional, loyalty is purchased, and principle is optional. Where alliances are measured not by shared values, but by personal benefit. Then came the economic dimension, the concentration of wealth, the influence of billionaires in elections, the transformation of campaigns into contests of capital rather than ideas. Sanders cited staggering disparities, not as rhetoric, but as data points illustrating imbalance. When a small number of individuals can shape outcomes through financial dominance, the promise of equal representation weakens. Voting remains, but power shifts elsewhere. He named this system plainly, oligarchy. Not as an insult, but as a structural diagnosis. A political environment where immense resources determine access, messaging, and survival. Where candidates who challenge concentrated power face overwhelming opposition funded by those with the most to lose. And where regulatory debates are drowned out by advertising budgets and super PACs. Crucially, Sanders did not frame this as a single-party failure. He acknowledged that wealth exerts influence across the political spectrum, that corruption is not ideological but systemic. And that reform requires more than outrage. It requires dismantling mechanisms that allow unlimited spending to eclipse public interest. Ending super PAC dominance. Reconsidering Citizens United, restoring the principle that elections are decided by people, not fortunes. Underlying all of it was a moral question. What does democracy require to survive? Truth, accountability, limits on power, respect for institutions, a shared commitment to facts. Sanders warned that persistent falsehoods, repeated until normalized, corrode the foundation of self-governance. A democracy cannot function when reality is negotiable, and trust is optional. As he concluded, the call was not for blind loyalty or uniform agreement. Disagreement is inherent to democracy. Debate is its engine. But there must be a shared line that cannot be crossed, a refusal to accept concentrated power without oversight, a rejection of governance driven by intimidation or misinformation, a commitment to ally with democratic partners rather than authoritarian systems. This was not merely about Kristi, Noem, or Stephen Miller. They were named as symbols of a broader direction. A governing philosophy that, in Sanders' view, prioritizes control over consent and power over principle. His demand for new leadership was framed as a necessary step, not a final solution. The closing truth of this moment is stark. Democracies do not disappear overnight. They erode gradually through exceptions, justifications, and silence. History does not ask whether warnings were dramatic. It asks whether they were heeded. The future of the American system will not be decided by a single speech or a single vote. It will be decided by whether institutions hold, whether citizens remain engaged, and whether power is challenged when it exceeds its bounds. This is why moments like this matter. Not because they settle debates, but because they force them into the open. Because they remind viewers that democracy is not self-sustaining. It demands vigilance. If you believe these conversations deserve careful scrutiny, independent analysis, and accountability-driven reporting, support our work. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.